opening track begins with what the album ends, this captivating ode to rebirth, an anthem of surrender to what comes as a natural part of life in Celtic understanding.
Ategnatos is like an overture. It introduces the atmosphere and the topic of the album, and it heralds what is going to happen.
The song Ategnatos pours on exactly this and reflects and mocks our innermost fear, the fear of dying and letting go.
It's the story of descent, metamorphosis, and rebirth.
And it also sees a question of opulence and suffering no one therein, conceiving that it's the poor man who clings tightly on what he's given for fear of losing it, while it's the content man of wealth who spends his riches freely.
This structure is present in every single book, movie, and narrative that we find fascinating. It's the story of every mythology, religion, and every single human being. Every time when something bad happens to us and we don't know what to do and we go to the dark place, this is chaos, this is the descent. Then we have to adjust ourselves to overcome the struggle and be reborn. It's a mythological cycle in everyday life, and it's an idea that is very close to my heart.
Everything has its origin in darkness. The day arises from the night, and the unborn baby receives its life in the dark of the mother's womb. The grain must fall into the soil and break in its darkness first before it sprouts and becomes a precious plant, and the grub first must die in the dark of its cocoon before it spreads the wings of a butterfly. He who is to hear, let him hear.
We wrote Ategnatos midway through the session for the new record, and I think it turned out to be the quintessential track on the album, so to say, in a sense that it combines all the typical elements for a classic Helvetia song.
In a nutshell, Ategnatos is about life offering us a chance to grow. And in Celtic understanding, growth and renewal and rebirth roots in death and dying. Metamorphosis, or recurring or even sometimes repetitive transformation is a topic to be found over and over again in Celtic mythology, allegorically portrayed as actual shapeshifting. Interesting here is the fact that the metamorphoses usually occur during situations or times of distress or persecution, actually representing an escape, a rescue, or a solution. Deathwalker lyrically follows the tradition of mythic narratives as we find them in later medieval Welsh bardic poetry, yet it focuses on the mortal remains, so to speak, and how things once vital and precious to us pale into blatant insignificance after being shed during the metamorphosis.
I think it's one of the most modern sounding songs on the album, and I really like the epicness, the epic feel of the song.
Yeah, the song comes with a very groovy and driving instrumental part in the middle. It's based on a traditional Irish reel called the Fairmoy Lasses, and I remember recording it. It was pretty challenging. Playing it, that reel itself, it's quite comfortable, but in Deathwalker we just played really, really fucking fast.
The most challenging part on Deathwalker, singing-wise, was to find the good chorus melody.
It even outstrips the solo I play in King, which makes it the most raving and lightning folk tune we've ever played.
Blackwater Dawn again is a song to center around the topic of the otherworld and the Celtic image of dying, death, and what lies beyond. or more precisely, it's centering about the otherworld and the journey there. I like earlier songs of ours, such as Quoth the Raven, Ategnatos and others. It's based on the Celtic conception of dying being a journey, usually across a sea.
This song was one of the most challenging songs for me on this album. Yeah, I remember when I was in the studio and recording the chorus, it just didn't work out somehow, and I really had to give it a break, and I went out to catch some air, and yeah, I went back and somehow it worked out. I'm pretty happy now, especially with one note. It was so challenging to sing it, but in the end we made it work, so yeah, I'm happy with this song.
The first traces of that song go way back to a tour in Russia we did last year.
The Cry in the Wilderness is a rather old schoolish Helvetii song, I would say, much in the vein of tracks such as Your Polish War.
I think it turned out to be a quite old schoolish Helvetii song in a way that for me it has that kind of Slania vibe, especially the chorus.
Lyric-wise, regarding the wording and the lyric poetry, it's ridiculously plain and unelaborate and kind of obvious. The actual magic lies in what it says. Every single line of its lyrics carries thoughts shelves of books could be written about. And yeah, let's not get into detail here. I'd rather say, may the voices of Ategnatos speak for themselves. Like Lucht Dunon from our album Everything Remains as It Never Was, the Ravenhill deals with an ancient etiological tale, the foundation myth of the Gallic city of Lucht Dunon, today Lyon in France, which is also connected to the myth of Cesronius and Toriscus, which you will hear about later on during these track-by-track commentaries. In some sense, the Dunon legend is also strongly expressing the thought of Metamorphosis, and most of all the thought of rebirth and renewal.
This song was so much fun to record because it has a big emphasis on the choir, and to record a choir is just so much fun because I can try out different sounds, different colors of the voice, and put them on top of each other.
And generally for us it's super important that music and lyrics go hand in hand. We don't want to write random songs and then just add lyrics later on or something like that. But to us it's very important that our songs also musically express what the lyrics are about. And in that sense, due to the archaic character of the Lucht Dunon legend, also the song The Ravenhill comes very archaic, quite old schoolish and very, very folky. The Silver and Glow is a beautiful and enchanting traditional Irish reel, here played slowly in a short acoustic instrumental interlude. The title stands for the standing light of the nightly moon, as in the Silver Sister from our album Origins, by the way, which embodies the dark and the well of all life in Celtic thinking.
If I had to describe Ambiramos in one word, it would be refreshing. It's really different from everything that Helvetii has done so far, and I actually have to say that I was skeptical the first time I heard it in the studio, but I admit that I like it a lot right now.
We wrote Ambiramos in the studio actually, and it came along really spontaneously.
I have a great personal memory connected with this song. I've never been too creative musically on my own, but I love to contribute to ideas that already exist. In the studio I was writing a lot of hurdy-gurdy parts, and one of them was supposed to be for Ambiramos. I was in the studio, I was improvising and I was trying to wrap my head around it, and then Tommy Vetterli came around and I went stiff because, you know, he's a strict guy. But then, long story short, I came up with the idea that eventually made it to the record, and he was like, yeah, okay, and I was like, yes, it's such a small thing, but I'm so proud of it.
Yeah, it was the last song we recorded actually.
Yeah, and it was the one that took me the longest to record. And I remember at like 5:30 in the morning we finished it, and one note was the highest one on the album, and I was kind of exhausted already, but still could hit it, and that was like my highlight on the album.
Ambiramos is the Gaulish form of the Old Irish Imram. In medieval Ireland, the so-called Imrama voyage tales arose, and they were tales concerning a hero's voyage to the otherworld. And even though the Imrama tales were mostly written in the Christian era already, they still preserve pristine Celtic mythology within them. Interesting is the typical role of the often heroic protagonists. Once embarked on their journey to the otherworld, most of them have never ever been seen again. And those who were, they return from that magical place as completely changed and transmuted people. The later Celtic mythology began to talk more precisely about the otherworld, or rather it gives us the chance to learn about it since it left literary testimonies. And in these we read about different areas within the otherworld actually. In a Tiros Jovincan, the land of youth, or Tiananok in modern Gaelic, or Machos Melvias, the plain of delight, or Machmel in Gaelic, would be such places. Majestic Fury is a rather drastic and angry song.
It's obviously one of the more aggressive songs on the album. It's kind of the start, or like an entry point for the second, more dark side of the record. And I remember this was actually the first demo that I got from Creepy. And I was kind of surprised, like, okay, this is different. And then, yeah, we decided to add that quite heavy breakdown in the middle section, and yeah.
It's based on an old Celtic belief, the Celtic eschatology, the theory of the apocalypse. According to the teaching of the Druids, the earth will, cleanse and renew itself by water and fire in recurring intervals. So, in their understanding, there's not an end to the world. There's rather recurring new beginnings. The song contemplates the aspect and regards the events of obliteration and erasement, as drastic and tragic as they are, as something good and God-ordained and beautiful, due to the fact that they're equal with a new beginning. And so Majestic Fury observes and describes these events in the verses, while the chorus is basically written like a prayer, an invitation to the water and the fires.
Step by step we trudge on the scarlet road.
Slumber marks the first part of a two-song cycle, the song Worship being the second part of it. Both songs are based on mythic fragments of the legends about Cesronius and Toriscus.
Lyrically, this song, it really means a lot to me.
The Cesronius myth basically describes the psychological and the social mechanisms that usually happen when a society is confronted with an overly strong leadership, or in other words, a dictator. And sadly enough, what usually happens is that the majority just bows their heads and follows.
This song has this overwhelming feeling of helplessness to it, but it also has a little spark of hope.
We really wrote the music around the lyrics, or to complement the lyrics.
Interestingly, this ancient myth also shows up the solution of the whole thing. And in that myth, the solution comes in the form of the Celtic god Ategnatos, which, according to his iconography, is pretty much the opposite you would expect to deliberate enslaved people. It's pretty much the opposite of this muscle-packed warrior hero kind of guy, such as Hercules in the Greek mythology, for instance. No, Ategnatos in his iconography is usually depicted as this skinny, very fragile old man. And here comes the interesting fact, because he represents the sharpened mind, the sharpened intellect in Celtic mythology. So the main message of this legend is basically to not just follow without questioning and to fucking use your brains. And the essence of that ancient legend that most likely has been written down more than 2,500 years ago is also what struck us so much, because today we just have the legend, or even just fragments of the legend, but we don't know what actually happened back then. But apparently there was something happening that made it important that this legend has been written down and to show the people, to explain them something. And that's a crazy thing. 2,500 years later, if we look into our world, you kind of have to say that it's still important that this very story is being told.
This is the moment of the album when we go to the underworld. There is apathy, there is threat of death, but hell, we are moving forward.
Basically, we had this really simple but heavy riff in the beginning, which comes in after the first verse, and that was actually we didn't need much else musically to really stress that heavy feel of the song.
There's a lot of space for the hurdy-gurdy and the song, and it makes me very happy.
And I saw a beast ascending up of the sea of the west, and it made the earth and all men dwelling in it to worship the first beast.
Worship will punch you in the mouth.
It's definitely one of our harshest, darkest and fastest songs ever, and I just love it. It's just so fucking vicious and brutal.
It's so intense, and the main theme is so incredibly insolent, and it has a beautiful chorus, and the folk part is so majestic.
It's my personal favorite song of the album.
And of course, it's a special song on the album for a different reason, because we have a certain guest on this one.
Randy Blythe from Lamb of God is featured on it.
Yeah, that session was really remarkable.
I remember it was a late night. I was sitting in the kitchen of the studio together with Jonas, and we were just discussing about this long intro of the song. So yeah, we were just thinking about who we could ask, and Jonas came up with the idea of Randy Blythe. And so yeah, I mean, we're friends with him since many years, and so I just sent him a text message, but we had no idea what they were doing at this moment and if they were available. And the cool thing was that Randy then wrote back like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And it's actually quite convenient since we're touring Europe at this very moment, and in a few days we'll play in Switzerland. So that was a very convenient and crazy coincidence.
Randy came into the studio and did his parts, and he actually offered additional parts while just going through the lyrics and stuff. That was really awesome.
When we worked on its folk arrangements in the studio, we really put a lot of energy in the atmosphere. We worked a long time on particular lines for the fiddle, harp and hurdy-gurdy, played around with single notes countless times until it was right, and expressed and underlined the nasty and bizarre atmosphere of the song. That, of course, corresponds with the lyrics, which are very earnest and dark.
Worship, the second part of the song cycle on the Caesarius Smith, kind of changes the camera angle, so to speak. It's written from Caesarius' viewpoint and unmasks his face in all its hideousness, and exposes the full absurdity of his intents. And they even become more absurd if you keep people's attitude in mind, of basically just resigning and bowing their heads. And honestly, pretty much akin from the usual, oh come on, it can't be that bad, we all know from ourselves. The three-night feast, well, Trinoction, the three-night feast of Simonias, is that watershed moment in the Celtic calendar where the great wheel fulfills its round and the year ends and a new one begins, and all life itself gets reborn. There's an ancient Celtic inscription on that event, which has been found during archaeological excavations. And the text of this inscription you hear in this track, Trinoction, but it also marked the very intro of our album Slania. Back then it was our former fiddle player, Mary Tadic, who did that narration, and so it's a really, really great pleasure to have her on board again, featuring as guest narration artist in this very track, speaking these ancient words one more time.
Will you remember me? Still know my name when I'm set free.
Threefold Death is probably my favorite song out of the whole album. I cannot decide between this and Worship. Together with the lyrics, it creates a piercing vision of a dying man and his perimortem struggles.
The so-called threefold death sometimes appears in Celtic mythology. Today we do not know too much about this concept, yet it seems to be rather obvious that it expresses an eminently potent kind of death, almost like the pursuit of a holistic annihilation. The song deals with that concept of the threefold death, but again also contemplates the question of its remains and legacies.
It's full of contrasts. A beautiful, delicate melody sung by Fabienne is put together with a brutal blast that makes my hair curl. The verse is almost psychedelic, but then it's relieved by a groovy guitar riff.
Threefold Death is one of the more special songs, I would say, on the record. I think it's my secret favorite. We didn't have a chorus when we entered the studio for that one, and I remember coming up with something and then Pretty coming in and adding his part, and then Tommy literally adding his part. So that was a really cool way to write that chorus. And of course that song's got the chant part or chant-ish part for elevated standards, which I'm really curious about people's reactions on that one. That was also really spontaneous, and yeah, I think this song is very diverse, and I really like it.
Writing girly parts for this song was quite challenging, but I enjoyed it a lot.
dark but very emotional and beautiful song, solemn and majestic.
This song is one of my favorite ones on the album. I especially like the yodel part in the chorus. It is in the background and it gives the whole song a traditional vibe.
It's also a favorite of mine. I really like the groove that song has, and we actually ended up keeping the guitar solo from the pre-production. After trying countless other variations in the studio, we just ended up keeping the very first, very spontaneous take on that one.
Due to the key of the song, I had to transpose the folk tunes for the violin. That's basically no problem at all, but it would have meant that the fingering and the shifts changed massively and the use of open strings would not have been possible anymore. But to keep that folky, flowing, raw character of traditional Irish tunes, playing with open strings and respecting bowing is very important. So I recorded this song with my carbon violin, on which I use lower tuning. I do this in quite a few of our songs. That's, by the way, also the reason why I sometimes changing the violin during our live shows.
In fall 2017, it happened that we got to know a wonderfully gifted film scriptwriter, and we somehow became friends. We learned about his current project and have been asked to contribute a song for the movie soundtrack, and we were stunned since the storyline of the movie perfectly fell into the whole conceptual idea of Ategnatos. Long story short, Breathe is based on a cinema movie that is yet to be finished and released, and it tells about the often strugglesome relationship of our modern manifest world and the Celtic otherworld. The cauldron of Rebirth is one of the most spellbinding symbols in Celtic mythology. The song pours over that mythic image from the viewpoint of our modern everyday lives. For once more, we cannot see how this ancient archetype could have lost any of its significance, weight, and truth. So Rebirth describes dying in one of these deaths that we die during our lives, understanding death as a process, a voyage where death at some point arises on the horizon and even becomes the awaited destination. Like Ambiramus and, well, the Imrama tales in general, it reflects on what will follow death and on its effect on our reborn selves.
Well, Rebirth, as you all know, was the first single for Ategnatos, and we've been playing it for maybe 1.5 years now. It's, for obvious reasons, it's still a challenge to play it every time. We changed some bits here and there for the new version on the album now, and there's a story about the guitar solo, because as you'll hear, it's a new guitar solo on the record. And while we were in Sweden at Jens Bokeren's Fascination Street Studios, he came up to me and said, "Yeah, you're the guy who recorded the guitar solo, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then he was like, "Yeah, there's some parts here and there I think you could do better." And I was like, "Okay." So yeah, that's why I prepared some new parts for the solo, and that's what you will hear.
And the song is leading into the album outro, which is actually the Rebirth chorus melody sung in its traditional way.
The album's outro is nothing but a heartfelt and emotional carrying on and completion of what was celebrated in Rebirth and the complete album.
And it was just the right moment to record it. It was after midnight and I felt very connected and inspired. So I think, yeah, it turned out well.
It did.
I surrender all to thee, and I see nothing less when nothing is left. Oh, if I fathom last night, I give myself